Hey everyone, this is Mr. Carlon. How you guys doing? Welcome to the virtual classroom. Before we begin today's lesson, I just want to let you guys know that I hope that we can get back into the classroom as soon as possible. But most importantly, I hope everyone's healthy and safe, and can't wait to get back in there. So, in the meantime, I'm going to be giving you some lessons and some practice as well. So just be on the lookout for new posts presenting to your email, and I'll also try to post them on YouTube or some other way so you guys have access to them and can view them at your convenience, okay? So we're gonna be looking at irregular verbs today. And I wanna make sure that we all understand some of those characteristics that help us identify a regular verb and seeing how they differentiate from irregular verbs, okay? So the first thing I want to do is just kind of show you what I set up for us today. I have 3 columns here, and the 3 columns allow us to see, we're going to look at these 3 verbs today, and those verbs are allow, make, and fly, okay? Then I actually put them into the past tense for us, and then I used an auxiliary verb, one that we practiced right before spring break. So we can create the present perfect tense. All right, so let's go ahead and start and look at some of those characteristics of that tell us that we're working with either a regular verb or an irregular verb. And the first thing you can see here is the first verb, allow, is conjugated here in the second column with an ed. And as we know that if you have a verb that ends in ed, it's a regular verb. Okay, but how do we know if it's irregular? Well, it simply doesn't have ed at the end of it when you conjugate it into the past tense. We have our example here, make, in the present tense. And when we change it to the past, it changes to made. Made is the past tense form of the verb make. And when we compare these two, we can see that characteristic right off the bat. Allowed ends in ed. Whereas made does not. And then we have a third verb here that's also irregular, fly. So when we change this into the past tense, it changes from fly to flew, F-L-E-W. We don't have to add an ed at the end of this. We actually cannot add an ed at the end of this. So that's what tells us that this verb is irregular. Okay? So that's the way we can identify when we're looking at verbs in writing and when we listen to them in speech. But there's also a third column here, and the column that we have here has us working with verbs using, it's actually a verb phrase because we have more than one word here. And we're going to construct the perfect tense using the past participle of the verb. And as you can tell in the first row here, we have allow in the present, allowed in the past. And when we add the auxiliary verb has to this verb phrase, we keep this in the past participle, so it's still in the past tense. We come to the second row here, and our verb is make. The past tense of this is made, which tells us that it's an irregular verb. And when we add the auxiliary to it, we keep it the same as the past tense. But this is called the past participle. Okay. This is where it can kind of get confusing now, okay? We have our third row here. Fly, flew is the past tense. And then flown is the past participle. So when we add the auxiliary verb has, this has to change to flown, okay? And this is what can be confusing to a lot of language learners. And actually, this is something that's a very common mistake that you hear with native English speakers as well. And so a lot of times I have questions that are asked by students. How do we know when a verb is irregular and when it is regular? Really the best way I can tell you to learn these is to memorize them. There are hundreds, there's probably about approximately 200 irregular verbs in the English language. And so when you look at trying to learn these, the best way to learn them is to memorize them. And then you also have the added challenge of memorizing the differences, the subtle differences, when you have to use the past participle when you use an auxiliary verb, okay? You can always test that out as well, and you can usually use a listening test. You can just use your ear for this. Let me just give you a quick example before I move on to the next part of the lesson. Let's say I wanted to create the present perfect for fly. Okay, so if I were to write just a quick sentence here, they fly first class. Pretty straightforward, simple present, okay? I wanted to change this into the past tense. I would just conjugate it here. It's an irregular verb, so it's actually flew. They flew first class. Simple sentence there, right? It's written in the simple past. They flew first class. This is my subject, this is my verb, this is my complete idea. Now, let's say I'm trying to write this sentence and I'm not sure how to write this in the present perfect because I'm not familiar with this yet. Or I want to test out and see if this is the correct word to use. Present perfect requires me to use has. Sorry, it does not. Requires me to use have, because this is plural. They have flew first class. Okay. Now, if I'm just listening to this, they have flew first class, doesn't sound right. And so I might, as a language learner, have the experience of just understanding and playing with words that I've experienced before, and I might get lucky. Let's see here. They have flown first class. That's good. It sounds good. Okay, but we can't always do this. Sometimes it doesn't work like that. Sometimes we don't have this word registered in our minds yet, and so because we don't, we have to actually look it up. We have to use resources. You know, in the classroom, you definitely have resources with your partners and your peers. You typically have resources through the internet and computers, and so during this time, you could definitely still do that. It's just going to look a little differently. You might have to send me an email. You might have to text one of your friends, show them this, but definitely play around with it, and try to see if it works. Okay. So just real quick before we transition into the next part of the activity, where I'm actually going to use these words and sentences for you to show you the subtle differences. We are really focused on looking at irregular verbs, okay? And we're going to really play with understanding that once you change them from the present to the past, irregular verbs don't have an ed ending. They change differently. And sometimes they don't change at all. But we're going to look at these two right now in the next part, okay? And then our irregular verbs change again when we have to use them with auxiliary verbs sometimes as well. Okay. And here, in this example here, we do not have to make a change, but in this one we do, because the past participle is different from the past tense. Cool? All right, so I hope you are following along and kind of seeing this, and hopefully with some practice you'll be able to identify this a little bit more. At the end of the lesson, I will give you some resources that you can use online, some references that you can use as you're constructing your own sentences and you're playing with this a little bit. And definitely, if you have any questions, please send me questions through Remind. You can send me questions through email. You can also contact your team leaders and they can get a hold of me, and I'd be more than happy to help you out. Okay? So, again, looking at the differences between regular verbs and irregular verbs, and we're going to go to the next part of the lesson in just a second. Thank you.